The Jungle Book, 2016 adaptation of the Rudyard Kipling book, directed by Jon Favreau, starring Neil Sethi as Mowgli, and as voices of the animals we have Bill Murray, Ben Kingsley, Idris Elba, Lupita Nyong'o, Scarlett Johansson, Giancarlo Esposito, and Christopher Walken. Interestingly enough, the film was developed around the same time as another adaptation of that same book, which was called Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, which Andy Serkis did for Netflix. So inevitably, I will compare the two movies since they take the same story, essentially, and were released only 2 years apart. The story, which I think we all know. Mowgli is an orphan found in jungle by the panther Bagheera and given to a wolf pack to be raised as one of them. And as he's growing up, he's under the wing of several other teacher animals as well, until a ruthless tiger named Shere Khan begins to target him under the guise of the fear of humans and the fact that Mowgli could potentially disrupt the balance of life in the jungle. He really wants to take revenge on Mowgli for being permanently scarred by a man years ago, which will of course lead to a conflict in the jungle. So let's start with how the film looks, and it looks amazing. Apparently not a single scene was shot on location. It's all green screens in the studio, and also all of the animals were computer generated as well. And if I didn't know that, I probably wouldn't realize, at least about the locations and sets. It really does create a convincing illusion that all of this is real. The animals themselves are almost photorealistic. It's just hard to believe how good technology is nowadays in that regard. And in fact, that same technology was later used for Lion King as well, also made by Jon Favreau. Now, here's my problem with it. By making the animals photorealistic and looking just they're indistinguishable from real animals, and that makes them less expressive. I mean, think about it. Animal faces were not made for talking, so even if you make their jaws open and close, the eyes and the facial expressions are still incredibly limited. Compare that to the animated movies or the Andy Serkis adaptation, which in fact a lot of people criticized from the trailer that the animals look weird, but then you get into the film and you realize why. In those films, the animals are not photorealistic because their faces are deliberately exaggerated. They're made to resemble human faces slightly more, which means the characters can better emote. They have more muscles on their faces, and in turn, we as the audience get engaged more because this is something we know. This is something we know which emotions they're supposed to represent. In this film, there were times when I thought that the character was delivering their lines in a lazy, lifeless way, and I was wondering why. Until I closed my eyes for a moment as a sort of experiment, and I realized that the voice acting is fine. It's that the faces don't reflect those emotions necessarily. It's not completely ruining the film. I mean, Shere Khan still looks absolutely fantastic. Baloo is still fun. But having the other version to compare these things directly, you then notice the disparity. I also thought that Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle was better looking in terms of the colors and the shot compositions and generally the cinematography. Jungle Book nails the reality, but sometimes looks just flat and ordinary. Whereas Mowgli has set some really memorable shots in it, ones which look like beautiful paintings. Final point which I wanted to make has to do with Kaa, the giant snake. See, this is something I've been wondering about, because in the book, Kaa is one of Mowgli's teachers, along with Baloo and Bagheera, and she's a mentor to him as well. And in general, she's just a positive character all around. Whereas both in the old animated Disney adaptation and in this film, Kaa is changed to be a secondary villain. Because in this adaptation she's a she's trying to eat Mowgli, and that's basically her only appearance, which got me thinking why that's the case. Why such a massive change, and not once but twice already? Because interestingly enough, the Andy Serkis version kept Kaa as a mentor, made no changes. And I just wonder if it maybe has to do with the Christian imagery and how in the Western culture, from the very early childhood, we are sort of conditioned to associate snakes with the devil, with an evil character always. Whereas in the Indian setting of the original book, that baggage doesn't really exist. The villain is the tiger, an animal that can actually hunt humans in certain conditions and circumstances, whereas snakes will probably leave you alone if you don't disturb them. And before you say that snakes are still dangerous and that's why she's a villain. Well, bears and pumas are also dangerous, and yet Baloo and Bagheera remain positive mentor characters. Why is Kaa the only vilified one of the three? I mean, I blame the Bible, honestly. Anyway, this was just a small piece of trivia that I've just been wondering about. Regarding the film, though, I did point out some criticisms, but I feel that most of them are the result of a direct comparison with Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, which I honestly consider to be the better version. It doesn't make Jungle Book look bad. This one is still a fairly decent film. I think there's a sense of adventure, there's humor and thrills and chills. So I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying it's a bad film, but if you have the choice of which one to see of the two, I'd still go with the Netflix adaptation.